I sold my company for $43 million and decided to celebrate with my son and his wife. When I look back, that was the moment everything quietly changed. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. I want to know what hour it was when you realized someone stopped seeing you as family and started seeing you as opportunity. The restaurant was one of those expensive ones with too much glass and too little warmth. Candlelight reflected on every surface like it was trying too hard to look alive. My son Ethan sat across from me, his wife Clara beside him. They were dressed in sharp tones, black, silver confidence. I remember thinking how grown-up they looked, how proud I should have felt. Instead, I noticed how often Ethan's eyes flicked toward my wristwatch, the one I'd promised to leave him someday. "Dad," he said, raising his glass to new beginnings. New beginnings, not ours. His dot, the waiter poured wine. Clara smiled like she was performing in front of invisible guests. I tried to join in, to laugh, to make it feel like a real celebration. But the table felt colder than the marble beneath our plates. I'd built everything from nothing, an architecture firm. Years of patience, late nights, sketching lines that became homes for strangers. Ethan had grown up seeing me work with steady hands and tired eyes. He'd said once, "As a boy one day I'll build bigger." I'd smiled. Every father wants his son to build bigger. But that night when he laughed about Dad finally retiring, it didn't sound like admiration. It sounded like rehearsal. The food arrived, steak for Ethan, salmon for Clara, something lighter for me. We talked about markets, travel, my health. The conversation felt more like a survey than a dinner. Then Ethan leaned forward, elbows on linen, so he said casual but careful. "What's the plan with the house now that you've sold the company?" "Thinking of downsizing?" The word hit harder than I expected. Downsizing. As if legacy were something you could fold and store away. I told him I hadn't thought about it. He smiled. "You should. We could help. Maybe find something more manageable." Clara nodded. "Something closer to the city. Easier for us to visit." I noticed the way her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass, absent, circling, calculating. It wasn't the kind of gesture you make when you care. It was the kind you make when you wait for someone to agree with your plan. I forced a small laugh, said I'd think about it. The table relaxed again. They started talking about renovations, markets, liquid value. I chewed my food and realized every word they used had stopped being about life. It was all about leverage. When the bill arrived, I reached for my card, as always. But the waiter hesitated. "Separate checks, right?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah, separate. Dad sold his company. Let him enjoy his independence." It was a joke. Everyone laughed, even me. But I remember the sound brittle, uneven. That receipt became the first paper I saved. Later that night, I sat in my study, the only light coming from a desk lamp that hummed faintly. The smell of printer ink clung to the air. I unfolded the receipt and stared at Ethan's signature line blank. Just mine, neat and full. I slipped it into a folder labeled Household Misc. It was nothing, really. Just paper, but something in me understood. Paper remembers what people want to forget. Outside, rain began tapping on the window, polite, persistent. I thought about how easily numbers change hands, how property shifts when hearts don't hold it steady. I'd spent my life drawing blueprints, designing spaces where families could feel safe. And now, at my own table, I'd built a house they couldn't wait to dismantle. Ethan texted me after midnight. "Great dinner.
Add.
We should talk about the house this week." I didn't reply. I just stared at the glow of the message until it dimmed. Then I opened my laptop, logged into the shared financial dashboard, and removed both their names from every account. My hand didn't shake. It wasn't anger. It was alignment. Somewhere between the click of the delete key and the hum of the printer. Something inside me settled. I wasn't going to fight. Not yet. I was going to observe, record, and build. Like I always did. The next morning, I placed the receipt in a sealed envelope, wrote one word on it: beginning. People think betrayal starts with shouting, with slammed doors. But it doesn't. It starts with laughter that doesn't sound like yours. And that night, as I turned off the light, I didn't know it yet, but my house had already become my first blueprint for revenge. I drew every line of this house myself, every wall, window, and door placed with care. When I look back now, I realize I wasn't designing a home. I was designing a confession that would one day be read by silence. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is where you are. I want to know how long it took you to understand that what you build for love can be sold for convenience. Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains, turning the living room gold. The walls still smelled faintly of cedar and paint, traces of Lena's touch. She used to say this house felt alive, like it breathed with us. Now it breathed differently, slower, heavier. The rooms echoed more than they used to. I walked through each one with the blueprint rolled under my arm. The same paper that had lived beside me for 30 years. When I unrolled it on the dining table, the corners still curled like they remembered her fingers. My handwriting was younger, sharper. Notes about insulation, water flow, light angles. But what caught me was the small doodle in the corner Lena had drawn it, a heart made of 2 overlapping triangles. The house wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It carried our mistakes in its walls, the door frame we painted twice because we couldn't agree on color, the floorboard that creaked where our son used to sneak out, the kind of imperfections that make a place real. By noon, I sat in my study and called Marianne, my lawyer and oldest friend. She'd known me since the early days, the first office, the first lawsuit, the first real win. When her voice came through the receiver, calm and professional, I could already sense hesitation. "David," she said, "your son came by the firm yesterday. He asked about the property deed, said you wanted him to review it." Stared at the framed photo of Ethan on my desk, the one from his graduation, all smiles and ambition. "No," I said quietly, "I didn't ask that." "He also mentioned you might want to transfer the title early," she continued. "I told him nothing was final until I heard from you directly." I thanked her, but inside something started to tilt, not collapse, just tilt. Like the slow shift of a structure under hidden pressure. When we hung up, I went to my filing cabinet. Every folder had been organized by year, color-coded like my blueprints. I pulled out the thick beige one labeled Property Deed minus 1997. Inside lay the original papers crisp, slightly yellowed, notarized in ink that had begun to fade. I ran my finger across my signature and Lena's. For a second, it almost felt like touching her hand again. Then I made a copy. The printer word, slow and steady. I watched as the light passed under the glass, line by line, capturing everything. When the copy slid out, warm and smelling faintly of toner, I slipped it into a new folder and wrote across it in pen, Blueprint Phase 2. It was the first time I'd ever considered my life like one of my projects, phase by phase, revision by revision. That evening, I received a message from Clara. "Hey David, hope you're resting. Ethan was wondering if we could start talking to agents. It's a great time to sell. No greeting, no warmth, just transaction." I stared at the text for a long time. The word sell looked uglier than I remembered. I could almost hear Lena laughing in disbelief. "They want to sell the house." "The one we built?" I replied simply, "Not ready yet. We'll let you know." Her response came seconds later. "Of course. Just helping you move forward?" I looked around the study, blueprints on one side, framed family photos on the other. Between them lay an entire lifetime of trust. The air felt thicker. The hum of the ceiling fan seemed louder. I placed the blueprint and the copied deed side by side on the desk. 2 kinds of truth, one emotional, one legal. The first was built to hold us together. The second might be what saved me. I opened a blank page in my notebook and began to write. Lesson 2. Even the walls you built with love need locks. It wasn't anger driving me, not yet. It was clarity. When the sun began to set, I rolled up the original blueprint again, careful not to tear it. The lines felt like veins, carrying history through ink. Before leaving the room, I pinned the copy to the wall, right above my desk. Tomorrow, I would visit Marianne. I had an idea forming, not of revenge, not yet, but of architecture. Paper architecture. A plan that couldn't be stolen, only read as I turned off the light. I whispered to no one, blueprints outlive builders, and for the first time. That thought didn't feel sad. It felt like the start of something precise. He said he called. The log said he didn't. That's how I knew affection had turned into obligation. Because somewhere, someone's pretending they reached out. And someone else is quietly checking the proof. It was a Thursday morning sunlight through half-closed blinds. The kind of light that makes dust look like memory. I made coffee the way Lena used to, 1 sugar cube, no stir. Old habits fill empty kitchens. My phone vibrated twice. Unknown number. I let it ring. The silence that followed lasted longer than it should have. I scrolled through my call log, half out of boredom, half curiosity. That's when I saw it. 2 calls from the bank, 1 from the lawyer, none from Ethan. Not for the past 3 months, he'd told everyone he called often. Dad doesn't pick up, he must have said. It was easier to blame a missed call than admit a missing conscience. I scrolled back further. The last time he had dialed me was on my birthday, a 5-minute conversation, most of it about taxes. I played his old voicemail from that day. Hey Dad, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. We'll visit soon. You never did. I sat in my study, the house humming with that strange emptiness that follows truth. The clock ticked like it was measuring silence. I decided to print the call log, small lines of data, each one colder than the next. The printer started to hum, its rhythm steady and indifferent. It didn't care about motives. It just recorded them. The paper slid out, warm against my fingers. I placed it on the desk, next to the old photograph of Ethan as a child holding a toy phone, pretending to call Dad at work. Sometimes nostalgia is the cruelest witness. That afternoon, I went to visit Mary Ann. Her office had that sterile comfort lawyers prefer, soft beige walls, polite clocks, no sharp edges. She greeted me with the kind of smile that hides concern. You brought something? She asked. I handed her the printed log. It's just a list of calls, I said, but I want you to keep it. She scanned the page, confused. What am I looking for? Absence, I said simply. She nodded, the kind of nod only people with years of quiet experience understand. Ethan's been asking about updates again, she added. Pushing for early transfers? I told him there's no reason to hurry. I smiled faintly. There's always a reason when people say there isn't. We spoke for a while about estate revisions, about witnesses, about the fine print that outlives families. When I left, the sun was already dropping behind the office windows. My reflection followed me in the glass, an older man walking beside his own shadow. Back home, I found a message blinking on the answering machine. Ethan's voice, rehearsed and easy. Hey Dad, I've been trying to reach you. Thought we could talk about the house this weekend. Let me know, okay? I stared at the phone. The lie was so gentle, it almost sounded kind. I played it twice, then printed the timestamp from my service provider. It was the first call he'd made in weeks. Right after talking to Mary Ann. Convenient? TIMING, I slipped both papers, the call log and the timestamped, into a new folder labeled Communications. My handwriting was steady. Filing wasn't anger anymore. It was evidence. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering faintly in the distance. I opened my journal, the one I'd started 2 weeks ago, and wrote Lesson 3. People say I tried calling the same way. They say I care. Both statements require proof. Felt cold writing it, but honest. Honesty doesn't have to be warm. I remembered something Lena used to say, love is made of repetition, not words, but presence. Ethan's absence was a pattern now, not an accident. The air in the house shifted as if it too was listening. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked, memory stretching its limbs. The phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID showed his name. I watched it light up, vibrating on the table. I didn't move. The screen went dark after 20 seconds, then lit up again, a text message. Dad, we need to talk about the house. need not want. I took a photo of the screen, one more addition to the record. Then I turned off the phone and leaned back in my chair. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock somewhere inside that silence. I realized something simple but irreversible. A man who measures time by missed calls will eventually stop answering altogether. Outside, the sky turned the same color as old paper, pale. Forgiving, final. I closed my notebook, sealed the printed logs in an envelope, and wrote across it in neat capital letters, proof of care. Tomorrow, I'd start labeling everything. Not out of paranoia, out of precision. Because when words lose their weight, paper becomes the only thing that tells the truth. I came home one afternoon and half my memories were boxed up. They said they were helping me declutter, because maybe you've come home once too, and realized the place still looked like yours, but didn't feel like it anymore. The front door was open when I arrived. That was my first sign. Clara's car was in the driveway, sleek, spotless, and slightly crooked, like she always parked in a hurry but never apologized for it. Inside, I heard laughter. Not mine, not Lena's echo. A kind of light, polite laughter that floats just long enough to sound innocent. The living room was brighter, too bright. Curtains open, windows wiped, shelves rearranged. The smell of lemon polish filled the air. It should have felt fresh. It didn't. Surprise. Clara's voice rang from behind the couch. She stepped forward, smiling like a host greeting a guest. We thought we'd get started on organizing some of your things. Make the space lighter for you, I asked. Ethan appeared from the hallway, sleeves rolled up, carrying a box labeled study. He looked confident, not guilty, not cruel, just sure of himself. That was worse. Hey, Dad. We were just helping out. You keep so many old papers, photos, drafts. It's time to simplify, you know? Simplify. The word echoed like an insult. I walked slowly around the room, scanning what used to be my life. The framed sketch Lena loved, gone. The antique clock from my father boxed. Even the armchair by the window had been moved. I'd spent years perfecting that corner for light and silence. Now it faced the wrong way. It looks different, I said carefully. Clara grinned, misunderstanding the tone. Better, right? We'll send the old stuff to storage until you decide what you want to keep. We even labeled everything. I looked at the labels. Neat handwriting on masking tape. Attic. Storage. They were sorting my life like it was a garage sale. I bent down and opened one box. Inside were photo albums, the kind Lena used to decorate with pressed flowers. Pages stuck together slightly from humidity. Each picture felt like a heartbeat I didn't remember losing. Ethan's voice broke through my thoughts. Dad, come on. You don't need all this clutter. You should enjoy things now. Maybe travel. Maybe let the house go to someone who'll keep it updated. Let it go. The house or myself? I nodded, pretending to agree. You're right, I said. Maybe I've held on too long. He relaxed instantly, the relief of a man who thought he'd won something. While they packed, I stood by the window, quiet. The wind pressed gently against the glass. It sounded like someone exhaling through regret. When they left for lunch, promising to return later, I went upstairs and opened every box they'd sealed. I took photographs of each one, wide shot, close-up label visible. Each click of the camera felt like reclaiming a breath. By the end, I had 50 photos. My life, cataloged by strangers who shared my last name. That night, I printed them all. The printer light flashed like a slow pulse. One by one, the images slid out. Proof of rearranged affection. I spread them across the dining table. In those photos, I could see everything they couldn't. Absence pretending to be care. I slipped the prints into a new folder labeled Possessions. Inside the first page, I taped one picture, a half-empty wall where our wedding photo had hung. The nails still showed. 3 small holes, aligned perfectly. Holding nothing. That's what betrayal looks like when it's polite. A clean wall where warmth used to be. Later, I called Marianne and told her about the surprise cleaning. Her tone stayed professional, but her breath changed. David, she said, keep a record of everything. Photos, lists, whatever you can. Sometimes kindness is a form of negotiation. I already started, I told her. She paused. Good. Then don't stop. When the call ended, I went to the kitchen. One of Clara's sticky notes was on the fridge. We'll finish the attic next week. The smiley face was drawn too hard. The ink had bled through the paper. I peeled it off and placed it in the folder. Paper doesn't just remember facts. It remembers tone. As I sat down, the house creaked softly, settling into a shape I no longer recognized. I imagined Lena walking through these rooms, laughing at the absurdity of it, strangers packing up our life under the banner of love. I whispered to the empty space, they're not just moving things. Lena, they're practicing for what came next, and for the first time. I realized they weren't rearranging my home, they were rehearsing my absence. When your lawyer pauses before speaking, something important is already gone, because somewhere right now, someone's sitting across a desk, about to learn that trust doesn't always leave a paper trail, until it does. Marianne's office had always felt like a safe place. Glass walls, quiet lamps, the faint hum of a copy machine. That morning, even the air felt still, like the room was holding its breath. She stood by the window when I entered, phone in hand. Eyes serious, David, she said softly. You should sit. Her voice was calm, but her body wasn't the kind of calm that's built to deliver bad news carefully. I sat, and she closed the door. Your son came by yesterday, she began. He asked for a copy of your power of attorney documents. Said you wanted him to manage things while you rested. I stayed quiet. Stillness is a useful tool when you want people to keep talking, she continued. He said you'd discussed it over dinner last week, that you wanted everything simplified. That word again, simplified. I didn't say that, I replied. My voice was level, almost detached. I know, she said. That's why I told him those documents weren't ready. But David, he was very confident. He even had a draft ready. Look. She slid a paper across the desk. I recognized the formatting, my name at the top, clean black serif font. The details filled in perfectly. All that was missing was a signature. Mine. I studied the text. It wasn't sloppy. Whoever wrote it knew exactly what to say to make it sound legitimate. Ethan had always been meticulous. That was my doing. I'd taught him precision, but precision without conscience is a dangerous inheritance. Did he say why? I asked. She sighed. He said it would just make things easier. Paying bills, managing taxes. He called it a safeguard. Safeguard. That word used to mean protection. Now, it meant control. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the document. My reflection stared back from the glossy table, older, quieter, sharper. Marianne, I said, how long have you known me? 30 years, she answered. You've never signed anything without reading every word twice. I nodded. And how many times have I been forced to prove what I already built? Too many, she said softly. The clock on the wall ticked, a steady, mechanical sound that didn't care for feelings. I want to make a few changes to my will, I said. She raised her brow. Changes. Yes. Quiet ones. No notifications, no shared drafts. She didn't ask why. She didn't have to. She just nodded and began to take notes. I watched the pen move across paper, smooth, looping, precise. There's something honest about ink. It doesn't lie the way people do. When she finished, I asked for a copy of the power of attorney draft. She hesitated, then handed it over. For reference, I said. As I stood to leave, she touched my arm gently. David, you know what this means, right? Yes, I replied. It means I'm not paranoid anymore. She gave a sad smile. Be careful, ma'am, I said. That's the problem. Outside, the day was bright but cold. The sunlight bounced off the car windshields, too clean, too sharp. I drove home without music, the city around me humming with indifference. Back at the house, I laid the forged draft on my desk. The paper looked ordinary, but I could feel the weight of betrayal in its fibers. I reached for my phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. Note, I said quietly. Marianne confirms Ethan requested power of attorney. Draft was pre-written. I never approved it. Keeping original for documentation. My voice sounded strange in playback, steady, factual. Like I was narrating someone else's story. I slipped the document into a folder labeled legal. Then, almost instinctively, I wrote a new title on the cover, Silence Speaks. It felt appropriate. Because silence isn't absence, it's evidence waiting for context. That evening, I sat by the window, pen in hand, writing the next page of my journal, Lesson 5. When people start using legal words in casual conversation, you've already entered negotiation. I looked out at the fading light. The trees swayed, casting shadows against the walls, the same walls I once drew by hand in architecture. You learn something early. A structure doesn't collapse in one moment. It starts long before, in quiet shifts, invisible cracks, small oversights. Betrayal works the same way. When I turned off the lamp, the reflection in the glass seemed to nod back at me, the version of myself that had stopped expecting loyalty and started collecting proof. Tomorrow, I'd visit the bank, because before you lose something, it's wise to count it. The teller smiled too long. That's how I knew my son had already been here. Because maybe you've stood in front of someone who already knew your story. Before you even opened your mouth, the bank was colder than usual that morning. Not in temperature, but in tone. The kind of cold that hides behind politeness. Everything gleamed. Marble floors, quiet footsteps, the faint scent of disinfectant and money. I'd been coming here for 20 years, always greeted with the same line, "Good morning, Mr. Holt. How can we help you today?" This time, the greeting came with a pause. "Good morning, Mr. Holt," the teller said. Her smile stayed on her face, but her eyes flickered, recognition mixed with hesitation. "I'd like to make a withdrawal," I told her. She nodded, typing quickly. "Of course. How much would you like to withdraw?" 100,000, I said evenly. Her fingers froze for a moment, too short for anyone else to notice, too long for me to miss. 100,000, she repeated, softer, like confirming it to herself. As she typed, her voice dropped half a tone. "Your son was here yesterday," she said casually, almost as if mentioning the weather. "He was asking a few questions about your accounts, wanted to make sure everything was in order." I didn't react. That's one thing you learn when the people closest to you start planning around. You'd never let them see your first thought. "Everything is in order," I said. "At least it should be." She nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. Just routine." Routine. That word has done more damage in history than malice ever did. While she prepared the paperwork, I looked around. Banks are built like cathedrals for numbers. Quiet, reflective, efficient. But today, the silence sounded like warning. When she handed me the slip, I read every line before signing. Date, amount, account number, initials, each field filled perfectly, each number exact. I signed with the same pen I'd used for decades, fine tip, black ink. Deliberate. As the printer spat out the confirmation, I noticed my reflection in the glass divider. I didn't look angry. I looked awake. The teller handed me the envelope with both hands, her tone suddenly gentler. "Would you like this transferred or in cash?" "Transferred," I said. "To a private vault, under my name only. No joint access, no notifications." She hesitated again. "Of course, sir. I'll arrange that." I thanked her, and as I turned to leave, she added, "Your son really cares about you, you know. He said he just wanted to make sure you were taken care of." I smiled, polite and thin. "I'm very well taken care of," I replied, "especially when I handle things myself." Outside, the air hit colder, sharp sunlight reflecting off car windows, wind brushing through paper trees along the curb. I stopped by a bench, opened the envelope just to check. The transfer confirmation was there, stamped, signed, proof that one small piece of my life still belonged to me. Paper doesn't care about intention, only signatures. When I got home, I placed the slip inside my folder marked financial, joined a growing archive, receipts, drafts, and quiet warnings. I added a note at the top in careful handwriting. Withdrawal made funds secured before attempted interference. Then, in my journal, I wrote another line, something short and steady. Lesson 6. Money only gets loud when fear holds the microphone. Later that evening, Ethan called. For the first time in months, his name lit up my phone. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail instead. His tone cheerful, almost rehearsed. Hey Dad, hope you're well. Just checking in. By the way, we were thinking maybe we could help you move some investments around, make things easier. They always said that before rearranging something that wasn't theirs. I played the message twice. Then I opened the bank's online dashboard and removed the linked email address I'd created for him years ago. One click, one confirmation. My accounts went silent again, mine alone. Afterward, I went into the kitchen and poured myself a small glass of wine. It tasted metallic, like something half-celebrated. I watched the liquid catch the light and thought about how money, when handled quietly, could feel almost moral. Outside, a storm was forming. The first drops tapped against the window, polite at first, then steadier. Rain always reminded me of blueprints, patterns repeating until they formed design. Somewhere between the sound of rain and the soft hum of the refrigerator, I realized I was no longer afraid. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was designing. Tomorrow, I'd open the next file. Legacy planning. Because if my son wanted to control my future, he'd have to read it one document at a time. I started writing again, not to remember, but to leave a trail. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. Because maybe you've reached that point too, when silence becomes so thick, the only thing left to talk to is paper. It was just after midnight. The rain hadn't stopped since the bank. Drops rolled down the windows like slow handwriting. The house was dim except for the small lamp on my desk. Its yellow glow turned every shadow into a thought. I opened the drawer where my old notebooks were kept. Dust rose like ghosts of unfinished ideas. For years, those pages held sketches, homes I'd designed, dreams of structures that never got built. But now, the designs I needed weren't made of walls and beams. They were made of timing, truth, and evidence. The first page began with a sentence I didn't think much about at the time. If they've already decided who I am, I might as well leave proof of who I was. Asterisk, I wrote slowly, my handwriting smaller than it used to be. The act itself was comforting, the sound of the pen moving, the drag of paper beneath my palm. Writing makes time visible. Each page became a chapter of my own quiet investigation. Page 1, the dinner. I described every detail. Ethan's laugh, the toast. The separate bill, page 2, the house. How they rearranged my memories under the word help. Page 3, the bank. The teller's too long smile. I didn't need anger to write. Precision was enough. At the bottom of each entry, I taped something physical. The receipt from the restaurant. A photocopy of the deed. A print of the call log. When you're being erased, evidence becomes memory. I worked through the night. The clock ticked like a heartbeat. Occasionally, I'd pause to listen, not for intruders, but for the sound of something still loyal. Paper doesn't betray. By 3 a.m., the notebook was half full. I gave it a title, The Journal of the Architect. On the cover, I wrote in bold letters, to be opened only when I'm gone. I wasn't thinking about death in the dramatic sense. I was thinking about design. Architects plan for longevity, buildings meant to outlast them. This was no different. I was building something that would stand after I couldn't. When dawn came, I walked into the living room. The light was soft, washed out, the kind of light that erases color but not shape. I placed the journal on the table beside the blueprint of the house. The two papers looked related, one structural, one emotional. Both proof of something built with intent. Then I took out my camera, not my phone, but an old digital one Lena had gifted me. I recorded a short video. My voice was calm, my face tired but unafraid. If you're watching this, it means you've opened my journal. I hope you read it slowly. Every page is a wall load, every word a beam. Remove one piece, and the structure collapses. I saved the file, titled it Journal Entry Number 1, and stored it on a USB drive. Then I placed that drive inside an envelope with the same instruction, open only after my death. It wasn't morbid, it was architectural. Every blueprint has layers of revision. This was mine. That afternoon, I met Marianne for coffee. The rain had stopped, but the sky still looked bruised. She asked if I'd made progress on the estate adjustments. "I've started documenting everything," I said. Her brow lifted slightly. "Everything." "Everything," I confirmed. "Dates, copies, voice memos, photos. If they decide to forget, I'll make remembering unavoidable." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something Lena would have said." I nodded. She was always better at permanence. When I got home, I went to the study. I wrapped the journal in brown paper, tied it with string, and sealed it with wax. The smell of the wax reminded me of her, the candles she used to light when she drew at night. Then, using a marker, I wrote on the front, "For Ethan and Clara." "You wanted the house? Now you'll have to read it." I slid it into the drawer beneath the blueprint. The same one I'd designed decades ago to hide private documents. The latch clicked softly, not a lock, but a promise, as I stood there. I realized something strange. I wasn't sad anymore. The pain had turned into purpose. Every page I wrote gave me control back, one line at a time. Before going to bed, I wrote a small note in my journal's final margin. Lesson 7. When they take your voice, write louder. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Marianne's message read, "He's planning to sell the house next week." The ink on my journal was still drying when I closed it. I looked around the room. At the blueprints, the notes, the photographs, the architecture of truth forming quietly around me. I whispered to no one. Let's see what they build without permission. They invited me to dinner again, this time with contracts instead of candles. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. Because sometimes the people who toast to your health are already drafting the paperwork to inherit it. The restaurant was the same one from that first night, the same long glass windows, the same soft music, pretending to be comfort. Only this time, Ethan didn't ask how I'd been. He asked if I'd brought my pen. "Just a little paperwork," he said lightly, tapping the folder beside his wine glass. Clara smiled across the table, the kind of smile you give before delivering a sale. I sat down slowly, letting the chair scrape against the floor. The sound cut through their practiced cheer. "I didn't know we were signing things tonight," I said. Ethan's laughter came quick, too easy. "It's nothing serious, Dad. Just a valuation. The real estate guys wanted your signature before the weekend, so they can start the process." "The process," I repeated. "For selling the house?" Clara nodded, reaching for her glass. "It's a good time to sell, David. Interest rates, market trends. You could make a lot. You deserve to relax." Relax. Another word for surrender. The waiter came, took orders, left. I let them talk about logistics, prices, future buyers. I nodded occasionally, pretending to listen. But my mind was already somewhere else, in my study drawer, where the real version of that document, the one I drafted, was waiting. I'd been expecting this dinner. People who plan betrayals always move in predictable rhythms. First, persuasion. Then paperwork. Ethan finally slid the folder across the table. "It's straightforward," he said. "We'll handle everything. You just sign here, and we'll make sure you're comfortable." I opened it. The document looked legitimate. Valuation reports, market comparisons, agent details. A perfect mask of professionalism. But I'd seen this layout before. Years of reviewing architectural contracts trained me to see what others miss. A small line at the bottom caught my eye. Transfer of holding authority, preliminary consent. It wasn't a valuation form. It was a pre-authorization. Once I signed, they'd control the sale. "Looks fine," I said, voice calm. "May I see your copy?" Ethan blinked. "Our copy?" "Yes," I said. "You mentioned you were signing too, didn't you?" He hesitated, caught between arrogance and uncertainty. "Oh, right, of course. We'll handle ours later," I smiled. "Let's make it official tonight." I reached into my bag and pulled out my folder. Same size, same cover, but different inside. I slid it across the table with practiced ease. "Here," I said. "You sign this one, and I'll sign yours." They exchanged glances. Clara's smile tightened, suspicion creeping in like a draft. Ethan opened my folder and flipped through the pages. His eyes moved quickly, searching for something. He didn't know what to look for, but instinct told him to stall. "It's missing the agency contact," he said. "That's fine," I replied. "You can fill it in later." Just a gesture of trust. "Oh." He looked up, uncertain. The silence between us stretched thin. The waiter returned with wine, breaking the moment. Ethan finally laughed, trying to regain control. "Dad, you really don't need to be this formal. We're family." "Family loves clarity," I said quietly. He didn't sign. Of course he didn't. People who write traps rarely walk into them. But I wasn't disappointed. His hesitation was all I needed. It told me he knew exactly what he was doing. I took my folder back, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my plate. "Maybe another time," I said. Dinner went on, but the warmth never returned. Clara talked about holiday plans, Ethan about market timing. I nodded, smiled, and paid the bill for all of us this time. Generosity is the best camouflage. When we stood to leave, Clara lingered behind. Her voice was lower, softer. "He's not as easy as he used to be," she murmured to Ethan, thinking I couldn't hear. "I know," he whispered back. "We'll figure it out." I stepped into the night air before they could see my face. The city lights reflected on wet pavement, each one flickering like an unspoken truth. At home, I wrote in my journal, Lesson 8, when someone calls it a conversation, check for paperwork. Then I placed both folders, theirs and mine, in a sealed envelope marked dinner pitch. I smiled faintly as I closed the drawer. The game wasn't about signatures anymore. It was about timing, and in that quiet moment, I realized the trap was already set. They just didn't know who built it first. The doctor said I had 6 months of quiet ahead, his words, not mine. Quiet. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from, or what time it is. Because sometimes life doesn't end with a countdown. It begins when you finally start paying attention to time. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and folded paper. A place built for waiting. People think bad news arrives suddenly. It doesn't. It comes softly. It's like a form sliding across a desk. Your heart's working harder than it should, the doctor said, scanning the chart. His voice was clinical, smooth. It's not critical, but you'll need to slow down. Less stress, more rest. I smiled at the word rest. It sounded more like advice for the living than a warning for the dying. He kept talking numbers, probabilities, percentages. All I heard was the clock on the wall. Each second landed differently now. Measured, defined. Should I be worried? I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. You're an architect, right? I nodded. Double quotes, then think of it like this, he said. Your foundation's fine, but the structure's showing its years. You can't rebuild, only reinforce. It was an honest metaphor. I appreciated that. He printed a report, signed it, and handed it over a clean sheet of paper carrying a quiet sentence. Recommend lifestyle moderation. Patient advised to reduce stressors. The printer hummed, and for a moment, the sound felt familiar. My entire life had been measured by printers and drafts, paper turning into permanence. I folded the report neatly, slid it into my folder labeled timing. Then I shook the doctor's hand and walked out into a day that suddenly felt sharper. Clearer, the sunlight on the pavement looked almost new. The air carried that faint autumn chill that makes you remember everything you didn't say. On the drive home, I didn't think about dying. I thought about design. If I had 6 months, that was plenty of time to finish construction. Paper doesn't rush. When I got home, sat in my study and placed the report beside the others. Receipts, drafts, photographs. The folder was thicker now, heavier, as if truth itself had weight. Then I opened my journal and wrote, Lesson 9. Time isn't what you have. It's what you sign for. The pen scratched softly across the page. I felt calmer than I should have. Mortality doesn't scare people like me. Architects live with collapse in mind. It's how we learn to build things that last. That night, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. Streetlights flickered. Somewhere, a dog barked at nothing. Each house looked like a life mid-sentence, some still being written, others already edited. When I passed one under renovation, I stopped. The scaffolding creaked, ropes hanging like veins. A young worker on the porch nodded at me. "Old house," he said. "Old bones," I replied. "Still standing?" He laughed, unaware of the irony. Back home, I made tea and stared at the envelope from the doctor. The phrase "reduce stressors" lingered in my mind. For me, that meant reducing people. I pulled out my phone and opened the call history, Ethan's name at the top, and answered unspoken. My thumb hovered over delete contact. I didn't press it. Not yet. There was more to design before demolition. Instead, I printed the medical report again and added a post-it. Good foundation, minor structural stress, a private joke. Maybe. Or a reminder that even the most fragile things can carry meaning if labeled properly. Later that evening, I opened a new document on my computer, the first draft of what I would one day call the letter. The cursor blinked against the white screen. My heart monitor beeped faintly beside me, a rhythm and a deadline in one. I typed the opening line. If you're reading this, it means I finally stopped drawing blueprints and started drawing boundaries. Then I stopped. Not out of hesitation, out of precision. You can't rush something that needs to outlive you. I closed the file, saved it as draft 1, and stored it inside the Inheritance V2 folder. My plan wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping. The kind of justice that doesn't shout. Before bed, I stood by the window, watching headlights stretch across the street. I whispered quietly to Lena's memory, "Don't worry. I'm just reinforcing the structure." The next morning, Mary Ann called. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Better than okay. I finally have a deadline." She laughed softly, not understanding. I did. And somewhere between her laughter and the rustle of the paper on my desk, I realized mortality wasn't my ending. It was my schedule. Every truth needs a container. Mine was a gray folder. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from, or what time it is. Because somewhere, someone's finally realizing that hiding the truth is easier when it's organized. It started that morning, the one after the diagnosis. The rain had stopped, leaving streaks on the window like half-erased lines. I brewed coffee, strong, black, and stood in my study surrounded by paper. Every file, every receipt, every copy I'd collected sat piled on the floor like a small empire of evidence. I wasn't thinking about revenge, not exactly. I was thinking about clarity. The kind that arrives after you stop pretending things will get better. I pulled an empty gray folder from the cabinet, smooth, stiff, brand new. On its cover, I wrote in clean capital letters, Inheritance V2, not version 2 of my will. Version 2 of myself? I started sorting the dinner receipt from the night. Ethan joked about separate checks. The photocopy of the property deed, my signature still darker than Lena's faded one. The printed call log, every misnumber a quiet indictment, the legal draft. Ethan tried to have me sign forged in courtesy, the bank withdrawals slip-proof that. I'd already moved what mattered. Each paper slid inside with the sound of soft friction, like secrets making room for company. As I worked, I noticed the rhythm of it, slow, careful, almost meditative. Architects call it load balancing, arranging weight so nothing breaks under pressure. This was emotional engineering. By noon, the folder had shape not just physical, but moral. It was the blueprint of betrayal. I labeled the first divider tab proof, the second, intent, the third, timing. Every architect knows structure means nothing without sequence. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the desk. The gray folder rested in the center like a small, quiet verdict. A faint reflection of myself shimmered on its plastic cover. For a moment, I saw both versions of me, the trusting father and the man cataloging betrayal line by line. Both were real. Only one was still useful. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Clara. She stood there, holding a cake box, smiling like kindness had a price tag. "We were nearby," she said. "Thought we'd check in." "Ethan's in the car. Just a quick visit." I invited them in. The house smelled of coffee and paper, my kind of truth. Clara looked around. "Still holding on to all this paperwork, David?" she asked lightly. "You should let us digitize it for you." Digitize. A modern word for erasure. Ethan stayed near the doorway, glancing at the shelves. His gaze landed on the folder right in the open. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't need to. Guilt recognizes shape before it recognizes reason. I poured coffee for everyone. My hands didn't shake. Clara kept talking about upcoming listings, estate agents, streamlining your legacy. I listened the way one listens to distant thunder, acknowledging it without expecting rain. When they left, Ethan paused at the door. "Dad," he said, "you know, we're just trying to help, right?" I smiled. Of course. Everyone helps in their own way. He looked like he wanted to say more, then turned and walked to the car. From the window, I watched them drive off. Clara was already on her phone, probably texting someone about progress. The room was quiet again. I walked back to the desk, placed my hand on the folder and whispered, "You're the only one who knows everything." Then I opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one I'd designed years ago with a false back. The trick was simple. Press both corners at once, and it clicked open. Revealing a narrow cavity lined with cedar, I slid the folder inside. The wood swallowed the sound. The drawer closed with a soft click, a heartbeat trapped in oak. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, Lesson 10. When you build something meant to last, always leave a hidden compartment. I added one more sentence beneath it. Proof isn't loud. It just waits for the right reader. Then I sealed the entry with my signature. Neat, deliberate, final. Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon, silent and distant. I looked at the glow for a long time. Architects call that momentary illumination, when light briefly exposes every line of a structure before disappearing again. That's what this folder was. My flash of light. Captured and contained. Tomorrow, they'd invite me to another dinner. More smiles, more gentle words, more paper pretending to be kindness. But now I was ready. Because this time, I wouldn't be bringing my pen. I wrote my son an email that said, "I forgive you." Then I deleted it, because forgiveness is a kind of architecture. 2. It has to be designed before it can collapse. It was past midnight. The only light in the room came from my computer screen, washing everything in cold blue. I'd been staring at a blank email for nearly an hour, the cursor blinking like a steady pulse. Each blink asked the same question. What are you still trying to fix? The subject line read, "For Ethan, one last thing." I started typing. Slowly, carefully, like drafting a confession. Ethan, I've spent a lifetime trying to build something worth handing down. Not just a house, not just money, but a way to stand straight when the world tilts. I forgive you for forgetting what I tried to teach. Love, Dad. The words looked honest. They even felt honest for a moment. But the longer I looked at them, the less I believed them. Forgiveness was a luxury, and I'd already paid too much in trust. Still, I printed the draft. Watching the paper slide out of the printer gave it a strange legitimacy, like the truth needed ink before it could breathe. The paper smelled faintly of toner and surrender. I folded it once, slipped it into a plastic sleeve, and placed it beside my other files. Then I turned back to the screen. The email was still there, unsent, a fragile thing hovering between memory and proof. I hovered over send for a long time, and then I didn't send it. Instead, I pressed delete. The sound the keyboard made was small but final, a digital sigh. For a moment, I felt peace. Then, curiosity, The kind that comes when you know someone will go looking for what you've erased. See, I knew Ethan had access to my cloud. He'd set it up years ago, back when family accounts sounded like love, not leverage. If he searched the synced drafts folder, he'd find the email half-written, auto-saved, and unsent. I wanted him to, because nothing draws a guilty conscience faster than a forgiving sentence. The next morning, the phone rang. Marianne's voice carried through the line, calm but alert. "David, your son called me," she said. "He mentioned you were ready to finalize the estate." I smiled into the receiver.
Did he?
"Yes," she said carefully. "He said you sent him an email forgiving everything and that you wanted to proceed." I leaned back in my chair, the smile deepening. "Then I guess he read something that wasn't meant for him." Marianne paused. "Should I be concerned?" "No," I said softly. "You should be prepared." When we hung up, I opened my folder Inheritance V2 and added a new tab, Perception. Inside, I placed the printed copy of the deleted email, marked in red pen, draft never sent. Then I opened my journal, Lesson 11. People believe what they want to hear, especially when the lie feels like relief. That afternoon, I received a message from Ethan. "Dad, I saw your email. I knew you'd understand. We'll handle everything carefully from here." I stared at the message for a while. Every sentence felt polished, rehearsed empathy. I typed a simple reply, "Good to know," and I deleted that. 2. That evening, I poured myself a drink and stood at the window. Watching the streetlights flicker through fog, there's a certain pleasure in watching people build their own trap, especially when all you did was leave the blueprint lying around. Forgiveness had always been my flaw. Now it was my weapon. By pretending to surrender, I'd made him act early. He'd contact Marianne again, push for documents, think I'd lowered my guard. And in doing so, he'd leave the kind of digital trail that could never be deleted. Paper keeps memory. Code keeps motive. Before I went to bed, I took the printed copy of the email, signed my initials on the corner, and slid it into a plastic sleeve labeled "The Lie That Worked." I looked at it for a moment, that small piece of artifice that looked so much like grace. Forgiveness didn't need to be true. It only needed to look believable long enough for guilt to reveal itself. As I turned off the lights, I whispered to the empty house, "Good night, Ethan." And in the silence that followed, I could almost hear him whispering back, not with love, but with calculation. That was fine. Every architect loves seeing their design take shape. It was raining when I signed the paper that would outlive me, because somewhere, someone's putting their name on a document, not realizing it's the only honest sentence they'll ever write. The rain had been steady all day, not loud, just patient. The kind of rain that seeps into wood and memory. I sat by the window, watching the drops trace patterns across the glass. The air smelled of ink and thunder. It felt right, Marianne had called that morning. Her voice was brisk, efficient, but her tone carried an undercurrent of worry. "David, I've prepared the final version of the trust," she said. "It's exactly as you outlined. Conditional, silent until death, sealed under witness." "Bring it," I told her, "and bring a pen that doesn't hesitate." We met in a small cafe on the corner of 7th and Pine, the kind of place that looked older than its furniture. The lights flickered when we walked in. Outside, the sky was gray enough to make everything look like a black and white photograph. Marianne shook the water off her coat, unzipped her briefcase, and placed the document on the table. A heavy folder, thick as gilt. Its tab read, "Trust Revision, Holt Estate." I stared at it for a moment before opening it. The legal language inside was exact, every clause placed like bricks in a wall. But one line stood out. The one I'd written myself. Clause 9. Ownership of the Holt residence is withheld until the inheritors demonstrate moral conduct, equivalent to the builder's intent. It sounded poetic to most people. To me, it was architectural. Every inheritance has a load-bearing truth. Marianne glanced at me. "You're sure you want to go through with this?" "I've never been more certain," I said. "Paper remembers. People don't."
Outside.
The rain hit the windows harder. The sound filled the silence between us. "Then sign here." she said softly, sliding the document across the table. I reached for the pen, a black roller ball, smooth as thought. My hand didn't tremble. I wasn't signing away power. I was designing its aftermath. The ink bled slightly on the page, a small imperfection. It's almost human. When it was done, I leaned back and looked at the signature. It looked like a line drawn between two worlds, one that was still breathing and one that would speak later. On my behalf, Marianne sealed the document, stamped it, and placed it in a waterproof envelope. I'll store this in the firm's vault, she said. It'll activate upon your passing. No one else will see it until then. Good, I replied, and make sure Ethan's name stays exactly where it is next to the word conditional. She allowed herself a small smile. You've written quite a story, David. No, I said, sipping my coffee. I've written the truth in advance. We sat there in silence, the kind that doesn't ask for comfort. Rain streaked down the windows in perfect symmetry, like blueprints drawn by weather. When she left, I stayed behind. I needed a few minutes alone with the quiet satisfaction that comes from finishing something permanent. I opened my notebook, turned to a fresh page, and wrote, Lesson 12. Signatures are time bombs. They wait for honesty to expire. Then, below that, another line. This paper isn't revenge. It's a mirror waiting for daylight. Outside, thunder rolled, low and distant. I watched a couple run past the cafe window, sharing a newspaper above their heads. Paper is shelter, poetic symmetry. Before I left, I asked the waiter for a candle. I lit it and held the flame close to the wax seal on the envelope, softening its edge, as if sealing a promise rather than a document. On the envelope, I wrote in small, careful letters, to be delivered upon my silence. When I stepped outside, the rain met me like applause. The streets shone, mirrors of blurred neon. My coat grew heavy, but I didn't hurry. Every architect knows that structures need stress to prove their strength. That's what this rain was, the final pressure test. I walked home slowly, the envelope pressed under my arm, its warmth seeping through the paper. Every drop of rain felt like punctuation. At home, I placed the envelope inside the cedar drawer beside the journal. It's a quiet instrument waiting for performance. As I closed the drawer, I whispered, It's signed, Lena. The storm can begin. And somewhere between the thunder outside and the echo inside my chest, I knew the paper was now alive. Before I left this world, I left one more letter for her, not them. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. Because maybe you've also written something you never intended. Anyone alive to read? It was early morning when I drove to the cemetery, fog hugging the streets, like memory reluctant to leave. The world looked quieter than usual, almost paused. I had the letter folded inside my coat pocket, its edges soft from handling. I'd rewritten it 3 times the night before, each version simpler than the last. In the end, truth doesn't need decoration. The gates creaked open, their iron groaning like old bones. I walked the familiar path, 3rd row, 6th stone. Lena Holt. Even after all these years, the engraving still looked too new. Like time refused to accept her absence, I knelt down, my knees pressing into the damp grass. The soil was dark and heavy, the kind that clings to you like grief that doesn't want to wash off. I placed my hand against the stone, the cold of it grounding me in a way people rarely could. Good morning, I whispered. I brought you something. I unfolded the letter slowly, careful not to let the rain that lingered in the air smudge the ink. It was only 1 page, my final blueprint written for her eyes, or for the silence she left behind. Lena. I tried to raise him the way we built this house, on measured lines and shared light. But I drew too straight, and he learned to live without curves. They've turned our home into strategy, and me into paperwork. But don't worry, I've drawn the final plan. The house won't fall to them, not yet. It'll wait for someone who remembers how walls listen. I hope, wherever you are, the light still hits your face. It's the way it did through our kitchen window. I'll see you in the design that never needed approval. David placed the letter on the stone, folded once, then sealed it under a smooth, flat rock from the garden behind her grave. The wind brushed against the pages before I covered it, almost as if she was skimming it one last time. For a long while I just sat there. The rain began to fall again, light at first, then heavier. Drops ran down the headstone like tears. The earth was too polite to claim. I closed my eyes. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost architectural. Water against stone, memory against time. "Do you remember," I said quietly, "how we used to argue about blueprints? You said walls should always make room for light. I said walls were meant to hold everything up." Silence that followed was its own kind of answer. I reached into my coat and pulled out a small photograph, the last one of us together. Taken on the porch the day the house was finished. We were laughing at something off camera, sunlight cutting across our faces. I slipped the photo under the rock too, next to the letter. The act felt ceremonial. Paper beneath stone, proof beneath permanence. When I stood, my legs ached. Old age or consequence, I couldn't tell. The cemetery stretched out in front of me like an unfinished map. Every name was a story folded shut. Every stone, a sentence with no period. As I turned to leave, thunder murmured somewhere far away. I took one last look at her grave. The rain made it shine, soft and silver. "You'd like this storm?" I whispered. "It's calm, but it means business." On the drive home, I felt lighter. Not because I'd let something go, but because I'd finally placed something where it belonged. Back at the house, I opened my journal and wrote, Lesson 13, the dead don't need justice. The living do. But sometimes you have to send your message through the grave to make them listen. I closed the book, placed my pen on top, and looked around the study. Everything was ready. The journal, the trust, the folder. Only one thing left to do now, wait for the story to read itself. As I turned off the lamp, the rain hit harder. Drumming softly on the roof, Lena once designed to sound like applause when it stormed. I smiled. "Good night, love," I said to the ceiling. The foundation still holding. I didn't plan to die that night, only to rest. Rest had other plans. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. Because maybe you've also had one of those nights. When your body whispered what your heart had already decided, it had been raining all day. That soft, steady kind of rain that fills a house with its own heartbeat. The smell of wet earth slipped in through the half-open window, mixing with the faint scent of ink and wax. My study was still warm from the candle I'd lit earlier, the same one I'd used to seal the trust envelope. The flame had burned low, patient. Like it knew its purpose was almost over. I sat at my desk, flipping through the journal, not to add anything new, but to trace what I'd already built. Each page felt heavier than paper. Every lesson read like architecture disguised as memory. The last thing I'd written, the dead don't need justice. The living do, still glimmered faintly where the ink had thickened. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and listened to the rain tapping against the glass. It had become a language by now, the only one that told the truth without needing to speak. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and thoughtful. I imagined Lena sketching that sound into a line on one of her blueprints, labeling it structural rhythm. My chest had been tightening for days. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet pressure like the slow bend of a beam under too much load. I'd ignored it. There was work to finish. Always one more thing to label, one more file to seal, one more safeguard to set in motion. But that night, I felt it clearly. A deep pull, steady, inevitable. I stood, walked to the window, and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Across the yard, the lights of the neighboring houses flickered through the rain, faint, ghostly rectangles. Lives continuing in parallel. People laughing, cooking, not realizing someone nearby was rehearsing their own ending. I didn't feel afraid, just curious. On the desk, the folder Inheritance V2 sat neatly closed. Its corners aligned perfectly with the edges of the wood. Next to it, the trust envelope lay sealed, racks hardened like armor. Beside those was a smaller note I'd written earlier that evening. Only one line. Check the study drawer. It wasn't addressed to anyone. But I knew who'd find it, the nurse or Marianne. Or maybe even Ethan if fate decided irony was her favorite instrument. I folded the note once, set it on top of the folder, and placed my pen across it like a bridge. Everything in its place. The design was complete. The room felt smaller now. The air heavier, thicker. My heartbeat slowed into something deliberate. I sat back down, eyes on the candle. The flame flickered once. The room blinked. I thought about Lena. Her laugh. Her way of smoothing the edge of my blueprints with her fingers like she was softening the world itself. I thought about Ethan as a child, sitting under my drafting table, drawing his own crooked houses in crayon. There was still love in the memory, even if it had grown teeth. I smiled. The house held. I whispered to no one. The pressure in my chest deepened. A faint hum filled my ears. Not panic, just gravity. I reached for the phone, not to call for help, but to record one last note. My voice softer than usual. If you're hearing this, it means I've finally finished building. Everything you need is in the study. The rest is yours to interpret. I pressed save, titled it Final Draft, and placed the phone beside the folder. The candle flickered again. A small tremor of light against the window's reflection. My head felt lighter, my breath shorter. Somewhere downstairs, the old grandfather clock struck midnight. Slow, resonant, final. I closed my eyes. The rain outside kept talking, a steady applause, and then nothing. No thunder, no panic. Just stillness. The kind architect's dream of when a structure finally stops shifting. When the nurse arrived the next morning, she found the note first. Checked the study drawer, then the folder, then the sealed envelope, then the quiet body of a man who'd finished his design on time. That day, the rain stopped. The house stood silent, immaculate, a completed project, waiting for its next occupant to understand the plans. He spoke beautifully about me, almost convinced himself. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from, or what time it is. Because maybe you've sat in a room full of people pretending to grieve, and realized the loudest noise in there was the sound of guilt being folded into sympathy. The church was full, not of love, but of faces rehearsing it. The air smelled faintly of lilies and damp coats, that strange mix of perfume and rain that clings to morning. Someone had chosen soft piano music to play in the background, the kind that tells you when to sigh. Ethan stood at the podium. In a black suit he hadn't ironed himself. His voice carried across the room. It was polished and heavy with the right amount of tremble. My father, he began, pausing for effect, was a man of structure. He believed in doing things the right way, in patience, in integrity. He built more than houses. He built values. I almost laughed. Integrity. He said it like a word he'd just learned. Clara sat in the front row, her eyes damp, but her posture perfect. Grief performed in good lighting. From where she sat, she looked more like a widow than a daughter-in-law. Marianne sat behind her, still and silent, holding a black envelope in her lap. When Ethan's voice caught, the crowd leaned in, eager for sincerity. But even sincerity sounded rehearsed when it came from him. He talked about my discipline, my quiet strength, my devotion to family. Each line sounded more like marketing than memory. I could almost hear Lena laughing from somewhere unseen. He's pitching you like real estate. When the speech ended, polite applause followed, because people don't know what to do with silence at funerals anymore. Ethan stepped down, shaking hands, eyes glassy. After the service, the crowd moved toward the reception hall. Coffee, sandwiches, polite condolences. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but Marianne would tell me later in her own quiet way. Through the pages she'd record for the file, the funeral expenses came to just over $12,000. The invoice would later show that it was all billed to my estate. Of course it was. Even in death, the transaction continued. Marianne stayed behind in the church. She waited until everyone left before she approached the podium. The candlelight flickered over her glasses as she opened her bag and took out the envelope. It was smaller than the others. Black wax seal, my initials faintly embossed. Inside was a single page, folded twice. My handwriting, deliberate and patient. Marianne. When they finish talking about me, hand them the next chapter. Timing, as always. Is architectural D? She smiled faintly, a kind of weary affection crossing her face. Then she tucked the note back into her coat pocket. Outside, the rain had started again, light at first, like a reminder. She looked up, whispered something no one else heard, then stepped into the downpour. Back at the house, Clara poured herself a glass of wine. You spoke beautifully, she told Ethan. He nodded, loosening his tie. I meant every word. You think he left us anything? She asked. He smiled, a flicker of arrogance returning to his voice. Of course, he was all about legacy. There's no way he'd take it with him. She laughed softly. Let's hope his lawyer agrees. They didn't know that the lawyer was already holding the envelope, the one that would start unraveling everything they'd rehearsed. That evening, Marianne sat at her desk, the black envelope beside her. She made a call to the firm's clerk. Schedule the reading for tomorrow, she said. And make sure both of them are present. Any instructions? The clerk asked. Yes, Marianne replied. Lock the doors once it begins. She hung up, leaned back in her chair, and exhaled slowly. For years, she'd watched the family dance around ethics and inheritance, the way builders cut corners, hoping no one would notice the cracks. Now, the blueprints were about to be read aloud. At the bottom of the funeral invoice, the last itemized charge stood out: audio system rental, $600, for playback of pre-recorded message. Ethan hadn't noticed it. But tomorrow he would, and when he did, he'd finally hear my voice again. He thought it was a will. It was a verdict, because somewhere, someone's sitting in a lawyer's office, waiting to inherit something they don't deserve, unaware that the paper in front of them isn't a gift, it's a mirror. The next morning, the conference room at Marianne's firm was still and heavy, like the air before a storm. The blinds were half closed, stripes of white light cutting across the table. Ethan sat at one end, his posture sharp but restless, a man rehearsing patience. Clara beside him, immaculate as ever, thumbed through her phone, pretending not to care, which is how she always cared the most. At the far end sat Marianne. Between them, a brown envelope, sealed with red wax. Stamped with my initials DH, she had placed it gently in the center of the table, the way one might set down a live wire. Thank you for coming, she began, voice calm, deliberate. As executor of your father's estate, I'm here to read his final instructions. There will be time for discussion afterward. Ethan nodded, trying to smile. Of course. My father was thorough, always organized. Marianne didn't smile back. She broke the seal. The wax cracked like a quiet gunshot from inside. She withdrew a single document, several pages, handwritten in my own steady script. Across the top, in bold, deliberate ink, was the title, The Letter. She began to read. If you're listening to this, I am no longer here. That's all right, architects always finish their projects from afar. Ethan, Clara, this letter isn't a punishment. It's a blueprint. I've left behind walls stronger than concrete and truths more binding than law. The home you wanted to sell, the one you called outdated, inefficient, inconvenient, will not be yours. Not yet. Ethan shifted in his seat. Clara's fingers froze on her phone screen. Clause 9, Marianne continued. Ownership of the Holt residence is withheld until the inheritors demonstrate moral conduct, equivalent to the builder's intent. In plain language, the house remains in trust until you understand the difference between having and have. Holding. Ethan let out a quiet laugh. Brittle, sharp. This is absurd, he said. What does that even mean? Marianne ignored him and kept reading. Attached to this document are records, receipts, transcripts, copies of correspondence, bank statements, call logs. Each one is a wall in this new structure. Every lie you told, every convenience you chose over conscience, every transaction that replaced a conversation, I kept it. Paper remembers. She placed a small stack of printed attachments beside the letter. The pages fanned slightly, whispering like wind against wood. Ethan's name appeared at the top of every one, you see. Architecture is about integrity, not in the moral sense, but the physical one. Integrity means holding together under pressure. You, my son, were always more decoration than foundation. But foundations don't hate decoration. They just refuse to rely on it. Ethan's jaw tightened. This is manipulation, he said. He's not even here to defend it. Marianne finally looked up from the letter, her gaze steady. He didn't need to defend it, Ethan. He designed it. Till the court verifies compliance with Clause 9, she read on. The Holt residence shall remain in the care of the trust's executor. You may live there, but you may not sell, rent, or alter it. Any attempt to do so voids your claim permanently. Clara leaned forward, voice tight. That's insane. He's controlling us from the grave. Marianne folded the letter carefully. No, he's teaching you from it. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing. We'll contest this. He can't actually, Marianne interrupted gently. He can. You see, he recorded this session for court verification. From beneath the table, she clicked a remote. The overhead speakers crackled. Then my voice filled the room. Calm, unhurried, familiar. Ethan, Clara, if you're hearing this. It means Marianne kept her word. I didn't build this to punish you. I built it so you'd remember what permanence feels like. I loved you both. But love without respect is like a house without walls, all air, no shelter. The recording paused. In the silence that followed, even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath. Ethan's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked small. Not evil, not cruel, just unbuilt. Marianne closed the folder and slid it back into its envelope. The trust is active, she said softly. The house stays under my supervision until further notice. Clara's voice broke. What are we supposed to do now? Marianne stood. You could start by reading the letter again, this time as a plan, not a punishment. Outside, the rain began again, steady, measured, cleansing, on the table. The red wax seal lay broken in two perfect halves. One half read legacy, the other lesson. Guilt doesn't whisper, it leaks. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. Because somewhere, someone's trying to delete proof that was never digital to begin with. The morning after the reading, Ethan woke to a silence that felt staged. Clara wasn't in bed. The coffee machine was on, but the pot was empty. On the kitchen island, the trust documents were spread out like open wounds, highlighted, underlined, annotated in red ink that wasn't his. He poured himself coffee that wasn't there, set the empty cup down, and stared at the words that had rearranged his life. Overnight, conditional inheritance, moral compliance, executor authority retained. He ran a hand through his hair, picked up one of the pages and read it again. Clause 9. The same sentence that had echoed in his head all night. Until moral conduct equivalent to the builder's intent is demonstrated. What does that even mean? He muttered. What does he want from me? A confession? From the living room, Clara's voice cut through. You should see this. She was sitting on the couch, laptop open, eyes wide. On the screen, a news headline blazed across the feed. Architect's posthumous letter sparks. Legal storm, Holt family trust under scrutiny. Underneath, smaller text. Document leak reveals detailed accusations of manipulation and fraud. Ethan's pulse quickened. How the hell? Clara turned the screen toward him. The article showed scanned images, receipts, bank slips, phone records, all watermarked property of Holt Estate. His name appeared on nearly every page. It's everywhere, Clara said. Social media, local news, even business blogs. Someone leaked it all. He grabbed his phone. Notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, messages from old colleagues, investors. Even his firm's PR manager. Ethan, you need to address this. Is it true your father recorded everything? Pull the accounts before the press does. His throat tightened. It's Marianne, he said. She's behind this. She's setting me up. Clara shook her head. She doesn't need to. You did that yourself. The words landed sharper than thunder. He stared at her, disbelief fading into quiet dread. "You think I deserve this?" "I think," she said, closing the laptop, "your father planned this better than you planned anything in your life." He turned away, fists clenched. "No, I can fix this." He opened his phone and began typing furiously to his lawyer, to the press, to anyone who'd still answer. But every attempt at damage control made it worse. Within an hour, screenshots of his panicked messages were already online. By noon, his business email had been suspended, pending investigation. His company's investors issued a public statement. "We are deeply disturbed by the allegations concerning Mr. Holt." Each notification was another nail in a structure he'd built out of arrogance. At 4 p.m., he received an anonymous text. "Truth loves daylight. Paper beats panic." He stared at it for a long time, then deleted it, as if deletion could undo design. Clara started packing that evening. "I can't do this," she said quietly. "I didn't sign up to be a villain in someone else's ending." He followed her down the hall, desperate. "We can rebuild. I'll talk to Marianne. You can't rebuild something you never built," she said, cutting him off. When the door closed behind her, the silence didn't feel staged anymore. It felt earned. He sank into the chair beside the window, staring at the rain outside, the same rhythm his father had loved. Somewhere out there, paper copies of his lies were being read by strangers. Shared, dissected, archived, he whispered into the empty room. "You win, old man." But even then, he knew it wasn't about winning. His father had never played for victory, only for permanence. Across town, in Marianne's office, the file sat open. She'd received the court order that morning, granting full injunction over the Holt estate until further notice. Attached was a transcript, Ethan's frantic emails, public and private, time-stamped, archived. Printed, she placed the papers neatly in a folder labeled Panic Evidence Log. Then she smiled faintly. "Paper remembers," she murmured, closing it. Back at the house, Ethan opened his father's journal for the first time. The last entry stared up at him like a verdict carved in ink. Lesson 17. "When lies collapse, they sound like thunder. But thunder only follows light." Outside, lightning struck across the clouds, bright and merciless. The rain fell harder, and somewhere in that storm, the house, the one his father built, the one he'd tried to sell, groaned softly, as if it, too, was finally exhaling. "They didn't bury me quietly. They televised it. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from or what time it is. Because somewhere, someone's reputation is dying in public, and they still think they can edit the obituary afterward." The story had gone global, not because of money, not because of scandal, but because of precision. People love a clean revenge story, especially when it's written in pen. Within a week, my name was trending again. The architect who outsmarted his heir, news anchors said it like a riddle. Headlines turned my life's work into sound bites. Documentaries called it the quietest act of justice ever recorded. And Ethan, the man who once corrected my blueprints, now found himself trapped inside one. He tried to hide, of course. Changed his number, deleted his accounts, fired what was left of his PR team. But the world doesn't forget a confession that's printed in black and white. Screenshots of his voice messages, bank transactions, and false signatures were now part of digital folklore, modern. Hieroglyphs of arrogance. The media replayed Marianne's recorded reading of the letter on loop. My voice, calm, steady, unhurried, echoed through morning talk shows, podcasts, think pieces. Love without respect is like a house without walls. All air, no shelter. People quoted it like scripture. Some mocked it. Most didn't. For once, I was a viral ghost with perfect timing. Ethan tried interviews, 2 of them. The first was clipped mid-sentence when he called the trust an emotional ambush. The second ended when he shouted, "He's controlling me from the grave." And the anchor replied, "Or teaching you from it." That clip alone reached 500,000 views before sunrise. By the end of the week, his company's board voted him out. Investors distanced themselves. His friends, the ones who'd toasted his success, stopped returning calls. Even Clara's social media went silent. Rumors said she'd flown to Lisbon and still stayed in the house, the one he couldn't sell, couldn't escape. Every room reminded him of what he'd lost, and worse, what he'd misunderstood. The scent of cedar. The hum of the old ceiling fan. The photograph of Lena and me that he once boxed up now sat back on the mantel, placed there by Marianne after the court order at night. The house creaked like it was remembering him. He started talking to it. Was he right? He whispered once, pacing the study. Was this your plan too? The walls didn't answer. But the journal on the desk did still open to Lesson 17. He stared at the ink, then flipped the page. There was one more unfinished note, faint pencil lines, barely legible. Lesson 18. Legacy isn't what you leave. It's what refuses to leave you. Ethan laughed a cracked, humorless sound. That's it? That's your finale? He stood there for a while, rain drumming on the roof. Then he reached for the journal, running his hand over the embossed cover. His fingers trembled. He whispered, I hate you for being right. Cross town. Marianne watched the news from her office, footage of Ethan leaving the courthouse. Cameras flashing, voices shouting, questions he didn't answer. The world loves poetic justice, but Marianne knew this wasn't revenge. It was restoration, the final. Architectural adjustment. She turned off the TV and opened the last document in the file. The public release clause. A single-page note from me. Written months before my death. Once truth has been proven, let silence speak. Do not defend me. Do not explain me. Just show them the design. That's all it took. The story outgrew the scandal. Articles shifted from inheritance feud to architect's philosophy of permanence. The headlines changed tone. David Holt's moral blueprint, a design against decay, became what I never intended, a symbol. And he became what he never escaped, a cautionary tale. By winter, the rain stopped for good. The house, the trust, the files, all preserved. The papers stayed locked in Marianne's vault, except one, the journal. She returned it to the study, placing it exactly where I left it. Open to the last unfinished line. When Ethan came home that night, exhausted and hollow, the light from the window fell across the page. He picked up the pen that still lay beside it. My old one, ink dried but ready. He hesitated, then wrote beneath my handwriting, Lesson 19. Some blueprints can't be erased, but you can still build around them. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the book gently. The sound was soft, like forgiveness folding itself back into silence. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, slow, deliberate, almost approving, and for the first time since the funeral, the house didn't sound like it was grieving. It took him 6 months to come back, because maybe you've also stood over someone's grave. It's realizing that regret doesn't ask for forgiveness. It asks for comprehension. The sky that morning was pale and washed out, the kind of light that makes everything look temporary. Ethan parked the car at the edge of the cemetery and sat there for a long while, hands motionless on the steering wheel. The engine clicked as it cooled. The same rhythm as his pulse. He hadn't planned to come. But grief, like architecture, doesn't care about plans. It finds its way through cracks. The last time he'd been here was the funeral. Cameras flashing. Words rehearsed. Now there was no audience, no speech, only silence and the faint whisper of wind moving through trees that had learned patience. He carried nothing but a small envelope. Inside, it was a single page from his father's journal. The one he'd written his own line in, Lesson 19. Some blueprints can't be erased, but you can still build around them. He'd torn it out carefully, like removing a splinter that had been waiting to heal. He walked the path he remembered from. Childhood gravel crunching softly under his shoes. Each step felt heavier than the last. He passed the same iron gates, the same rows of names carved into stone, until he reached hers. Lena Holt, and beside her, newly engraved, David Holt, architect of permanence. The words looked colder than he expected, clean, measured, just like him. Ethan knelt down. The grass was damp, the soil dark with memory. He brushed a few leaves away from the base of the stone. His breath fogged in the chill. "Hey," he said quietly. His voice cracked, the way voices do when they're learning to sound human again. "I don't know what you'd want me to say." He paused. The silence that followed didn't judge. "I messed up," he finally said. "I thought I was smarter. I thought I could finish what you started faster, cleaner, without the weight." He looked at the two names side by side, his parents carved into permanence, and laughed softly. Turns out weight was the point, wasn't it? The breeze stirred, shifting the petals from a nearby bouquet. A few landed near his knee, bright against the gray stone. "I read everything," he said. "Every note, every file. The way you documented it all, not to humiliate me, but to show me what I refused to see. You didn't build a trap. You built a map." He reached into his coat and took out the folded journal page. "I added to it," he said. "Just one line. You'd probably say it ruins the symmetry." He placed it at the base of the headstone, anchoring it with a small stone. The wind caught the edges, tried to lift it, but it stayed, as if the ground itself wanted to keep it. He exhaled slowly. "You were right about everything. About Marianne, about the house, about me." The confession came out quiet, like air escaping a sealed room. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just want you to know I finally understand why you designed it that way. You weren't protecting the house from me. You were protecting me from becoming someone who didn't believe in houses anymore." He smiled faintly, the kind that carries both grief and gratitude. "I'm rebuilding," he said softly. "Not with money this time. With patience, with people. There's this small community project restoring old homes, teaching apprentices. Feels strange, but it's the first thing that's made sense in years." The cloud shifted, letting through a narrow band of light. It fell across the names, across his hand, across the page he'd left. "Thanks for the blueprint," he whispered. For a long while he stayed there, just breathing, no tears, no drama. Only a calm acceptance that what had once felt like punishment now looked a lot like design. When he finally stood, he placed his hand on the top of the stone. The granite was cold, but solid, like something finished, but not forgotten. As he turned to leave, the wind picked up, scattering the leaves in small spirals. One brushed against his arm before drifting away. He smiled, looking back one last time. "I'll keep it standing," he said. The gravel crunched beneath his feet as he walked away, slower, lighter, like a man leaving a place that no longer accused him. Behind him, the page fluttered once in the wind, then settled still. Lesson 19. Some blueprints can't be erased, but you can still build around them. The ink blurred slightly from the dew, not fading, just softening, like something that had finally learned how to forgive. Some ruins don't end stories, they start them. Because maybe you've also stood inside something broken and realized it wasn't waiting to be mourned. It was waiting to be rebuilt. It had been a year since the reading. The storm had passed, the noise had faded, and the world had found another scandal to feed on. But the house, the one his father built, the one that had survived pride, greed, and grief, still stood. And this time, Ethan wasn't trying to sell it. He'd moved his desk into his father's old study. The cedar walls still carried that faint scent of varnish and memory. The morning light fell through the blinds at the same angle David once designed, soft, angled, intentional. It didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt supervised. On the desk sat the journal, no longer closed, no longer fearful. The torn page he'd left at the grave was gone now, carried off by wind or weather, but its message had taken root. The first day of the rebuild project began quietly. Just 5 volunteers, young apprentices from the local technical school. They were nervous, polite, and eager. He gathered them in the living room. The same space that once hosted silent wars was now full of tools, ladders, and blueprints. "All right," Ethan said, voice steady but humble. "We're not demolishing anything. We're listening. Every wall tells us what it needs. Every beam tells us what it can still hold." The students nodded, unsure whether he was speaking about the house or himself. He smiled faintly. "You'll understand." They started with small repairs, sanding, replacing fixtures, cleaning windows, clouded with dust and time. Ethan guided them slowly, not barking orders, not delegating, but teaching. The rhythm of work filled the air, quiet but purposeful. At noon, they stopped for sandwiches on the porch. The same porch from the old photo, the one where Lena and David had laughed decades ago. The boards creaked, but not in protest. It was a kind of applause. One of the students, a quiet girl named Naomi, asked, "Sir, why fix an old place like this? Wouldn't it be easier to build new?" Ethan looked out toward the yard where sunlight filtered through the oaks. "Because easy doesn't last," he said. "My father used to say that." He didn't add that he'd only started to believe it recently. Later, in the study, he unfolded one of his father's original blueprints. The paper had yellowed, edges curled, but the lines were still sharp. Every angle carried his father's precision, every note, his restraint at the bottom corner. Beneath the architect's signature was a faint pencil mark Ethan had never noticed before. For whoever continues, build with care, not haste. He traced the words with his finger. It felt like a quiet handshake across time. That night, he sat at the same desk his father once used and opened a fresh notebook. Across the top, he wrote in clean, deliberate handwriting, "The Rebuild Journal." The first entry was simple. Lesson 20. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you repair when no one's watching. He underlined it twice. Days turned into weeks. The project grew. Locals came by, curious. Some donated tools, others time. Marianne visited once, standing by the doorway with a small smile. "He'd be proud," she said. Ethan shook his head. "No, he'd be precise." She laughed softly. Same thing, for him. By spring, the house had changed. Not dramatically, not like in movies, but subtly, respectfully. The cracks were sealed, the paint renewed, the air lighter. But the heart of it, the bones of his father's design, remained untouched. On the anniversary of his father's passing, Ethan returned to the cemetery. This time, he brought nothing, no letter, no paper, no words rehearsed. Just himself. He stood between the two stones, hands in his pockets. The wind cool and easy. "I kept it standing," he said quietly. "And I think I'm starting to understand how to build the way you did." A leaf drifted across the headstone, spinning once before settling. He smiled. "I'll take that as approval." When he left, the afternoon light followed him all the way down the path, soft, golden architectural back at the house. He placed a framed note on the wall above the study desk, a single line from his father's voice recording. Engraved in brushed steel, "Paper doesn't build houses. People do."
Ow!
The words gleamed faintly in the setting sun for the first time in his life. Ethan didn't feel watched or judged or haunted. He felt guided. Outside, the porch light flickered on automatically. Quiet, deliberate, steady. The rebuild had begun. Every design ends in light. Because maybe, somewhere right now, you're standing inside the life you once thought was ruined. And realizing it's finally beginning to make sense, the house woke with the sunrise. For the first time in years, didn't feel like a museum or a battlefield. The walls no longer whispered betrayal, they hummed quietly. Like an engine rediscovering purpose, Ethan stood in the study, coffee in hand, watching sunlight crawl slowly across the desk. It moved just as his father had intended, cutting through the blinds in perfect geometry. A golden lattice that divided shadow and illumination. The rebuild project had grown. There were 10 apprentices now, builders, engineers, even artists. The house had become both workspace and classroom. Every repair carried intention. Every nail felt like an apology accepted. That morning, Naomi entered with a folder under her arm. "Sir," she said, smiling, "we finished the skylight." He followed her up the narrow stairs, heart steady but full. The attic, once dark and forgotten, now opened into light. A glass panel stretched across the ceiling, framed perfectly within the original beams. The sun poured through it, scattering across dust particles like gold in motion. "It's beautiful," he said softly. Naomi nodded. We followed the lines you drew. He smiled. Those weren't mine. She looked puzzled. Then whose? He pointed to the faint pencil marks visible on one of the beams. His father's. Decades old, never erased. He drew them before the roof was even finished, Ethan said. Said every home should have a place where light never asks permission. Naomi smiled, and for a moment, the silence between them felt sacred. When she left, Ethan stayed. The sunlight hit his face, warm, steady, forgiving. He whispered almost to himself, You've got your light, Dad. He descended the stairs slowly, the way one leaves a cathedral, quiet, respectful. In the living room, the walls gleamed softly from the new paint, and a photograph hung by the fireplace, Lena and David laughing on the porch. Beneath it, in a small frame, was Ethan's own edition, a picture of the rebuild team standing together. Sawdust in their hair, pride in their faces, different eras. Same purpose. He sat at his father's desk and opened the rebuild journal. The pages were filling up sketches, notes, lessons written by his team. The last blank page waited like an open door. He took a pen, paused, then wrote, Lesson 21, Light is the final material. It exposes. It forgives. It finishes. He underlined it once, not twice. His father would have approved of the restraint. That evening, as the apprentices packed up and left, he lingered in the doorway, watching them walk down the path, their laughter drifting through the dusk. The house looked alive again, porch light glowing, windows warm. The faint smell of cedar and fresh paint blending like nostalgia made new inside. He poured himself a glass of wine and sat in the armchair by the window, the same chair his father had once chosen for its perfect listening angle. Streetlights flickered on. Crickets began their steady rhythm. He whispered to the empty room. We did it, old man.
Yes.
Somewhere in the silence, a floorboard creaked, soft, familiar, almost like acknowledgement. He smiled, leaned back, and let the sound fade into the hum of the night. Later, before bed, he returned to the study one last time. He opened the top drawer, the one with the hidden compartment. The cedar still smelled faintly of time. Inside was the old gray folder, Inheritance V2. He pulled it out, held it for a moment, then placed it on the desk under the skylight. Where the moonlight fell in clean silver lines, he opened the first page, his father's handwriting. Steady and alive. Blueprints outlive builders. Ethan smiled. Yes, he whispered, but they also evolve. He closed the folder, laid his hand on top, and let his eyes drift to the light above. The moon hung high, framed perfectly by the new glass. The light wasn't warm like sunlight, but it was honest, and that was enough. He turned off the lamp, leaving only the moon's reflection on the desk, a quiet circle of silver, the final seal in a story that had spent a lifetime designing itself. Outside, the rebuilt house stood steady against the night, walls strong, windows open, light unafraid, no ghosts, no vengeance, only design, and somewhere far beyond blueprints and time. The architect rested not in stone, but in the glow his work left behind. The end.